scandal after scandal.
Free thinker.
The scriptures mingle truth and fiction, and I cannot support their doctrines.
Rule breaker.
To take him away from his wife and children, unforgivable.
Trailblazer.
George Eliot's work was a revelation to her readers.
Maureen Lipman presents the extraordinary life of one of our greatest novelists, George Eliot, author of Daniel Deronda, tomorrow at 5:35 on BBC One.
I know he cares about you very much.
All it takes is a moment
Does he love you?
to change our lives forever.
I believe you were sent here for a purpose.
I suppose you take Deronda for a saint.
You will be my life. You will take the inheritance.
George Eliot's extraordinary masterpiece.
You do care something for me.
I care very much about you.
Daniel Deronda continues next Saturday at 9:05 on BBC One.
And there's a feature on how actress Romola Gary is transformed into George Eliot's leading lady in the December issue of BBC Homes and Antiques.
Let BBCi transport you to the most extreme environments and into the lives of mammals. By pressing the red button or text key on your digital remote or logging on to bbc.co.uk/nature, you can put your skills to the test and see if you'd survive. The life of mammals. An epic tale of survival continues with BBCi. It's as good as being in David's suitcase.
The news and sport now on BBC One with Peter Sissons and Rob Bonnet.
Ministers push for a new fire deal, this time affordable and realistic. But firefighters get widespread union backing as a Labour rift opens. 5 fire deaths and more serious accidents test the Green Goddesses. Miss World heads for Britain after 100 die in Nigerian riots. And on top of the rugby world, England adds South Africa to the spoils. Good evening. There were hints tonight from the government that they want both sides in the fire dispute to get back to seeking a 16% deal, but this time one that adds up. At the end of day 2 of the strike, there was fighting talk from other unions who pledged solidarity with the firefighters. The TUC leader accused ministers of shooting from the hip by squashing the deal that emerged on Thursday night.
We can win this dispute. We must win this dispute.
Even more defiant, after seeing their hopes of a 16% pay rise snatched away, firefighters at a mass rally in Glasgow are in no doubt as to who's getting the blame. Even moderate trade union leaders are condemning the government for scuppering the talks.
Well, I believe the government certainly did shoot from the hip yesterday morning and went forth into the studios to rubbish what had been done the night before. And I think they were doing no service to the employers' negotiators and certainly doing a lot of damage to their own credibility.
Firefighters have now become heroes in the eyes of many trade unionists, not what the government intended. At a TUC conference in central London, a specially invited senior FBU official was promised practical and financial support throughout the strike. The firefighters hope this show of support and solidarity will strengthen their hand in any future negotiations.
Nice to see you. Enjoying it?
The Defence Secretary was today trying to boost morale among troops in Nottingham who are having to cover the strike with their ageing Green Goddesses. The government is still looking for a way out, but it's not giving ground.
I believe that John Monks and the TUC should be looking to find ways of encouraging the Fire Brigades Union back to the negotiating table. There need to be discussions rather than strikes.
But despite Downing Street's earlier dismissal of the deal as half-baked, John Prescott is now sounding less confrontational. Writing in tomorrow's News of the World, he says, the FBU and the employers were very close to finding a solution on Thursday evening. He concludes that is still worth talking about. It may only leave the firefighters wondering all the more who's in charge and what's the government's message. It's going to take much more than warm words for them to leave the picket line. Jonathan Beale, BBC News.
Tonight, Green Goddess crews are continuing to answer emergency call-outs across Britain. On this, the second day of the strike, there have been 5 deaths caused by fires in Maidstone, Woodstock, Coventry, Liverpool and Blackpool. Police are also investigating a suspected arson attack in Kenilworth on the home of a striking firefighter. Robert Hall is at a barracks in West Bromwich.
Well, Peter, the crews that were the spearhead at yesterday's major blaze just down the road from here, you can see behind them getting ready for the night shift. It's been the end of another busy day right across the UK. Sadly, though, some of those incidents have ended in tragedy.
Early evening in Liverpool, one of hundreds of calls across the UK. Service crews called to this house found a fire that had already taken hold. Supported by strikers from nearby fire stations, they fought their way into the property but were unable to reach the occupant, a woman in her late 70s.
We got here, we did what we could with the equipment available. In this case, there was not a great deal what we could do to save a life, which is obviously very sad.
Earlier in the day, strikers in Oxfordshire had turned out ahead of Green Goddesses to reach a 70-year-old man trapped by fire nearby. Despite their speedy response, paramedics couldn't revive him. In South Wales, a multiple crash on the M4 again saw strikers working alongside the military. 2 people died after a lorry crossed the central reservation. One incident in Warwickshire has provoked a sharp police response. A firefighter's wife and children fled from their home after burning paper was pushed through their letterbox. Her husband, who was on the picket line at the time, now fears further attacks.
I can't comprehend what sort of person could do something like this. It's a cowardly act. It's a malicious act.
What was the pole you picked up? Elsewhere in the West Midlands, infantrymen from the Royal Regiment of Wales were still checking the site of yesterday's huge factory fire. Their success in containing the blaze has won universal praise and lifted this unit's morale. There's little time to dwell on the past, though. Tonight they've returned to more routine duties, a prelude to what's expected to be another busy shift. Well, and that busy shift continues. We've heard in the last couple of hours of an incident south of here in Gloucestershire on the A40. Green Goddess crews and rescue crews helping to free 2 people from a multiple car crash. Everyone here knows their limitations. They've had disappointments and sadness today, but they are continuing, as they have done, to do their very best to save lives. Peter.
Robert Hall, thank you. In many emergencies, striking firefighters, as you've seen, are still leaving their picket lines to help tackle major fires and emergencies. They know that major loss of life could turn the public against them. John Morrison reports from Glasgow on the firefighters' battle for public opinion.
In Glasgow tonight, another fire, another challenge for the military. It's suspected these derelict flats were deliberately set on fire. As the military fought to stop the blaze spreading, 18 people were evacuated from neighbouring flats.
This fire is just about out, all handled by the military. There was no sign of the regular fire brigade because they reckon no lives were at risk.
A mile away, firefighters respond to public support. They've already left the picket line once to help out. It's a sense of duty, but it also plays well with the public.
It's turned out that it is good PR for the papers and the media, but that's not our motivation. Our motivation is to keep the people in Glasgow safe.
This afternoon's rally in Glasgow attracted more than 1,000 firefighters and supporters. The strikers were encouraged by the level of public backing. For many firefighters, it was a family affair. This couple and their son travelled from outside Edinburgh.
Any time on the picket line, there's always noise like this in the background from people passing by, people in cars, and it is very encouraging, and it's what we need to keep us going.
Tonight, success for the military. No casualties, no injuries. It also means the firefighters got it right, but the gamble to stay away is a tricky one. If they get it wrong once, it could have a huge effect on public opinion. John Morrison, BBC News, Glasgow.
So how far apart are the employers, the Fire Brigades Union and the government? And what will it take to restart negotiations? Our industry correspondent Rory Kethlin-Jones is at Ealing Fire Station. Now, Rory, what, if anything, is going on aimed at getting negotiations restarted?
Well, Peter, despite that rhetoric we've heard from the wider union movement today, I think behind the scenes the anger of yesterday has cooled a little. There have been informal contacts today between the union, the government and the employers. Talks about talks, according to one union spokesman. He said the earliest talks could restart would be Tuesday, and it's not clear whether the union would actually end the strike to go into those talks. Remember, this strike is due to run till the end of the week, and really very unclear on what basis they would get back into talks. They're very angry, the union, about the government's role. They're saying if the government wants to interfere, it should interfere properly, get properly involved.
And briefly, Rory, what has to happen for a deal to be reached and for the government to let it through?
I think the major role now is for the employers. The employers are talking about how they can reshape that document they came up with on Friday morning in the early hours to make it more acceptable to the government. They're saying, well, perhaps if we talk more about that independent Bain review, the government will come up with some money. That's the big question. Is there going to be any money from the government?
Rory Ketland-Jones, thank you. And you can follow all the latest developments in the fire dispute on BBC News 24, which you can find on satellite channel 507, Freeview channel 40 and on cable. Israel has admitted that its troops shot dead a British aid worker during yesterday's raid on the West Bank town of Jenin. Ian Hook, who was working with the UN, was killed during a gunfight in the town's refugee camp. The Israeli army says its soldiers shot Mr. Hook by mistake because they thought he was a Palestinian gunman. The Miss World contestants are preparing to fly out of Nigeria tonight and head for Britain after organisers decided to pull out of the country. More than 100 people died in 3 days of violence in the city of Kaduna. The beauty contest will now be held in London.
Preparing to check out, the Miss World beauty queens won't be in Nigeria much longer. What should have been a glamorous tour has turned into a disaster. While the girls posed and partied, street riots led to hundreds of deaths and injuries. Today, the organisers finally agreed to shift the pageant to London. And this is where the trouble started, the northern city of Kaduna, apparently provoked by a newspaper article that enraged Muslims already angry at a beauty contest during the holy month of Ramadan. Today, the BBC visited local hospitals to gauge the extent of the wounded. Many left completely destitute.
Because most of them now are homeless. Their houses have been burnt. Some of them don't even know where their wives and children are.
But behind the rampage is a deeper cultural split in Nigeria. It's Nigeria's north-south divide that's the problem. The south is largely Christian, but the mostly Muslim north has gradually been adopting Sharia, or Islamic law. 2 years ago in Kaduna, Christian riots against Sharia law sparked violence that killed up to 2,000 people. And when earlier this year a Sharia court sentenced an unmarried mother to death by stoning, the outcry became international. A boycott of the Miss World contest was threatened. But Nigeria's Christian president pushed for the competition, an important showcase for the country.
Actually, it wasn't going to be anything outrageous. They had compromised. They were not going to ask the ladies to wear bikinis, for instance. They did their best to compromise.
Tonight, hopes the contest would bring good publicity are in tatters. Last year, Miss Nigeria won. This year, it's a public relations disaster. Bridget Kendall, BBC News.
The Duke of Edinburgh has denied press reports that he wrote letters to Princess Diana calling her a trollop and a harlot. The claims were made in a Sunday newspaper a fortnight ago. A statement issued today by Buckingham Palace says that his letters were neither curt nor unfeeling and denied that he'd used insulting language. Now, it's been a busy day in football and cricket, but first with news of today's rugby, here's Rob Bonnet.
Peter, thank you. Good evening to you. Well, another day of records at Twickenham today as England beat South Africa by 53 points to 3 and completed a Southern Hemisphere treble. The Springboks had never been so heavily beaten before. England, meanwhile, created another world first with 18 successive home victories.
England's players dreaming of a clean sweep over the Southern Hemisphere. They knew this would be a tough game. They didn't realise the fireworks that were still to come. As a match, it was compelling and brutal, never more so than when Yiannis Labuschagne left Johnny Wilkinson in a bruised heap. Wilkinson was dazed, Labuschagne sent off. In between the scraps, England were dominant, Will Greenwood easing them to a half-time lead that was never threatened. The second period, just as bruising. England got a penalty try after this foul, while Neil Back scored from a more familiar route. It was beginning to look easy. And Lawrence Dallaglio rounded off the rout. South Africa left with bruised pride, England left with, well, just bruises.
All South African games are tough. You know, they're physical. People want to win games. You know, you don't get easy victories in Test rugby against teams like South Africa. So you have to pay for it. And it was physical. It was tough. That's Test rugby.
And so an exuberant occasion for England and their massed ranks of fans. Few can remember them playing with as much confidence as this. But England's ambition now is to win next year's World Cup in Australia. And if they're going to do that, then they'll have to prove they can play as well as this, even when the crowds aren't on their side. Adam Parsons, BBC News, Twickenham.
Now at the Millennium Stadium, Wales were beaten 43-17 by New Zealand. Jamie Robinson's breakaway try helped Wales to a narrow lead at half-time, but the All Blacks ran in 4 second-half tries to seal a